Hi, I'm Jerry Deschane. Welcome again to The Local Perspective. The Local Perspective is a production of community television. We thank the station Stevens Point for working with us today. Also, Community Media of Wisconsin for distributing it. And I'm the Executive Director of the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. My guest today is sort of an unwilling poster child for civility. Might be the best way I'd describe 4th District Alderperson Heidi Oberstadt. Heidi, thanks for being with me.
Oh, thank you.
So, do you want to talk about civility in government?
Oh, sure.
Or would you rather talk about anything but?
I think it's an important conversation to have. I really do.
Absolutely it is. And, recent tragic events, shooting out in Washington, D.C., which, those things are always way out there on the extremes. But I think all of us involved in local government have seen an uptick, let's start there, of just plain nastiness. It's just not fun anymore. And I think what we want to explore today is that the way democracy should be? I mean, if you and I disagree with each other, it's not all, unicorns and pixie dust and everything. Or is there a better way? And if there's a better way, how do we get there? But before we get started, let me introduce Heidi. Heidi, as I said, is the 4th District Alderperson for the city of Stevens Point. You were appointed in May of 2015, correct? Your mayor, or the guy that was there before you, left, abandoned the job.
He rudely abandoned his alderperson role to become mayor.
Yeah, well,
And I filled that spot.
Okay, and then you were reelected in 2016.
Yep.
But background-wise, you are a professional photographer, right?
I consider that to be like my main job. That's
of several.
Yes, I do quite a few things, but the photography is how I pay my bills. The alderwomaning is how I fill my my internal bank of doing good for the community.
Okay.
And then I do everything else just for fun.
Yeah, and I've heard there's a triathlon that you're involved in, but it's a different triathlon. I think beer is involved here.
Oh, yeah. I love talking about this race. This is the flyathlon. Yes, it's in Colorado. And instead of a traditional triathlon where you swim, bike, and run, in the flyathlon, you run, fly fish, and drink beer. And It sounds really fun, like a bubble run or a color run.
But it sounds like something we would do in Wisconsin, to be honest with you.
It's actually very difficult. It starts up about 7,000 feet, and the race course is about 7.5 miles. There's a 7.5 mile and a 12-mile option.
Okay.
And you run up about 2,500 feet during the course of the race and back down. And the trout stream and the trail kind of run next to each other.
Okay.
So somewhere along the race, you have to be carrying like your water and your fly rod and everything. You take your rod out and you string it up and you catch a trout. And you take a picture of it to prove that you caught it and you put it back. And then you finish the race and then you drink a beer. Yeah.
Well, I can see all sorts. I mean, first of all, the altitude, forget it. My kids went to school in Colorado. I don't want anything to do with that. But what if the fish aren't biting? I mean, doesn't this all of a sudden become like a mega marathon?
Last year I went out and did it for the first time and everybody caught a trout. So there are some trout whisperers out there to help you if you're having a hard time. I was pretty lucky. I caught a trout on my second cast. And the first cast went into a tree, so any fly anglers out there will appreciate that was a pretty typical angling experience.
So do you do the where you got a big ball of string here that's kind of fly fishing?
Your line, yeah, you take it off your reel while you go, and yeah.
Well, when I was a teenager, trout fishing was you took a pole and dropped it in the water, and that was about it.
Yeah. Well, there was a guy at the race last year who just brought some line and broke a branch off on the course and caught a trout with that. So he didn't want to carry his gear. He was roughing it.
So and this sounds fun, really. What's it for? What's the benefit of this?
It's actually a fundraiser for a nonprofit called Running Rivers.
Okay.
Which all the funds that they raise, it goes to nonprofits that focus on wild and native trout and their ecosystems.
Okay.
So preserving the water in the areas that surround it.
And I don't want to call you an activist, but one of your passions is for water, and you're involved in Trout Unlimited in Wisconsin.
Absolutely.
Wisconsin Rivers Alliance. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so my passion is in preserving our cold water resources for fish like trout, native species especially. Brook trout are my favorite. Mm-hmm. and protecting the water that we all use every day. So making sure that we are aware of the threats to our water in our state.
Okay. And then you added this other dimension to your life of being a Stevens Point City Alderperson. What's the attraction there? Why'd you jump in?
Well, I jumped in for several reasons. First of all, I really wanted to feel like I had a meaningful impact in our community. I also discovered that there was not a lot of young people on the council and not a lot of women in the council, and I wanted to help change that. And I also have a lot
What's wrong with people like me?
I'm just a big fan of
don't go there.
diversity, Jerry. I'm a big fan of diversity.
Oh, you mean like there's half the population out there that are
You
women?
know,
Yeah,
I
right.
think differing opinions, I mean, this is going to be a nice lead into our talk on civility. Differing opinions and different perspectives are really important to have well-rounded conversations.
Absolutely.
And my last motivation for being an alderwoman is that I have several miles of riverfront in my district, and I wanted to make sure that someone was keeping a good eye on that.
Okay. And so the reason Heidi is our guest today, I should explain, she wrote a very compelling article in the August issue of the Municipality magazine. And if you look, here's the cover. We've got fireworks on the cover, and the headline is Civil Discourse. And we chose fireworks for a couple of reasons. First, sort of the obvious patriotic, this is local government interaction. It's all good. It's all part of democracy. But then there's fireworks. And you tell a very compelling personal story about your first experience on the council. And it was not, kumbaya and let's everybody hug, was it?
It was not. And I will totally admit that I came into public service with a very optimistic, skewed view of what things were going to be. I really thought, and I wrote about this in detail, that I was going to hold hands with the other alders and the mayor and all my neighbors, and we were going to skip down the green circle, and everything was going to be hunky-dory and wonderful. And then we started a complicated discussion about some city-owned housing, and before I knew it, there was a man pointing his finger at me saying, "You're cold-hearted."
You're cold-hearted, not...
Yeah. And I was totally unprepared for that. It's like, I didn't sign up for this. I'm not ready. Is this the right job for me? Am I in the right place?
Well, plus, and I know you a little bit outside of your work with Stevens Point City Council, you're not cold-hearted.
Well,
no.
no.
That had to be one of those things that just...
I actually, in hindsight, I'm surprised that I was so upset about it, rather than just well, this guy just doesn't know me. Not even at all. Not even once. We never met.
So that was your introduction to local government service.
Yeah.
Okay, what happened? How'd you react to that?
Well, I cried in the car on the way home. I wasn't going to let anybody see me cry in the meeting, And then I was not going to tell you all that I cried in the car on the way home. But I thought, well, why not? That's what happened. That was my experience. And I learned that people don't always communicate what they mean to say in that moment. And this citizen was really passionate about that topic. And he wanted us to know as a council that if we didn't take care of the people that live there, that was a really cold-hearted decision in his eyes. And he did make an effective point. I have to say that.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to get to sort of how you grew out of it or how you're growing out of it in a second. But I want to talk about social media, because you also talked about the dimension of social media can actually magnify the harshness of the dialogue these days.
Absolutely.
Tell me about that a little bit.
So I've thought about this a lot in many different components, because I'm not sure, for a long time I wasn't sure, if things were getting more volatile in politics all the time, or if I was just getting older and more involved. I don't know if it was always this volatile in the 70s, because I wasn't on the planet, so I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that the internet and technology, especially social media, has really made all of our volatile conversations public. It's really easy to say things that you don't mean and start fights that you didn't intend on social media because you're not talking to somebody.
Right.
It'd be a lot easier for me to write you a really nasty email, Jerry, about something than it would be to tell you to your face those nasty things.
Right.
And so I think that has really elevated the level of angst and I don't even know the word how to describe what's happening in politics right now, but
Incivility is a word that I think I hear used a lot.
I think that's a perfect word for it.
Well, then let's ask the yeah but question. There are legitimate disagreements out there. You know, the guy that called you cold-hearted, I don't know what the issue was, but isn't that sort of the whole point of democracy is I think red, you think purple, we have to slug it out. I mean, doesn't incivility have to be kind of part of that?
That's a really good question. So I've been a part of a lot of different organizations and companies and groups where we get a lot of things done without any fists being thrown, virtual or
Really?
otherwise.
Oh, sorry. I'm kidding.
And I think it's interesting that in a lot of ways we view politics in a totally different way. People forget that we're all on the same team. We're all trying to make our city run well. We're trying to make our state run well. We're trying to make our country run well, or the planet. And at the end of the day, we're all on that same team. We're all still in that group together. So I think when people act with incivility all the time, it loses any power that it had. So you know me in and out of government, and you know that I'm a pretty happy, smiley person.
Right. Yeah.
Almost everybody knows that. Hi guys, hey mom. And that's sort of my general baseline level is happy, cooperative, willing to work. But when I'm upset about something and I act with incivility in those rare moments, it's such a contrast from my normal that it's really effective. If you are never cooperative and kind and a good listener and show your caring nature, and you're always acting with incivility, where do you go from there?
It's sort of people tune that out after a while, that I'm not listening to you.
I think so. And I think that once one person starts acting with incivility in a group or an organization, it makes it really easy for everyone else to jump on board with that. And it's a lot harder to step back and say, how can we discuss this with kindness? How can we make this effective? How can we stop arguing and yelling and find a common ground?
My guest is Heidi Oberstadt. Heidi is the 4th District Alderperson for the city of Stevens Point. I keep wanting to say 5th. Is there a 5th?
There is a 5th. There are 11.
Oh, okay. So
The 4th is the best district.
the 4th, it's the waterfront district.
It is, and the downtown square district.
Okay. All the cool people
You
go to
know.
Heidi's district. But we're talking about civility, and I think it's on the minds of a lot of elected officials in Wisconsin. It's on the minds of people all over the country, frankly, for that matter. And just with Heidi trying to have a conversation about, is this part of the fiber? What are we doing wrong? And where I want to go next, Heidi, is what do we do about it? And let's start here. That situation you ran into, when you ran into the guy that said you had a cold heart, how did that change how you approach things going forward?
Well, in that specific instance, I think our instinct when someone punches you, either with their words or their hand, it makes you want to shut down. It doesn't make you want to continue to engage with that person. So it was hard for me to do my job in that moment, to say, I know you're upset with me, but I really do want to listen to what you have to say. It's hard for me to weed through the insults to get to the meat of your content, what you're trying to tell me. But moving forward from that, it helped me learn that when people say things like that to me, they don't really mean it most of the time. They're passionate, or they're upset, or they're excited, and they have some important message that they want to convey.
Right. They're
so
trying.
I have to sort of try to see through whatever the unsavory part was to get to the important part.
Or maybe understand, because the anger is part of it, right? I mean, understand, okay, what's bringing this package? Why is he, maybe not why is he upset about it, but understand the whole perspective.
And personally, I found that a lot of people have a hard time fathoming that I'm just like a normal girl that wants to have a conversation with them about what's bothering them. They feel like they have to come in angry or upset to make me listen to them.
Really?
And
to kind of get you to open the door? And,
yeah. Although my door is always open. I love talking with people about issues. And I understand why people feel like they can't just have good conversations with politicians. You know, in the past, maybe they've had different experiences.
Okay.
But I pride myself on being open and welcoming. So the more that I talk to people, and I think the longer I do this and the more the word gets out about it, people realize they don't have to come angry to me. They can just come and talk to me about what's bothering them.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me chase a question, though, from what you said. Is it possible then that part of this is sort of our responsibility from the local government level because we've created the impression that we're not listening? Or is it just people have this biased view of government these days that, yeah, government doesn't listen to you, they're all bureaucrats? What is it? Is it a real problem that we've created that we need to open that door? Or is it sort of the social media world has created an impression that may or may not be true?
I think it's a combination of both.
Okay.
I can't speak for all of the people who had my job before I did for the past decades, but I think that, once again, technology has made it a lot easier for us to keep in touch with our constituents. They can find me online, on my email, on the city website, on my Facebook page. They know where I live. They know my cell phone number. They could find me anywhere. And I like it that way.
Okay.
At first, I thought that people would call me all the time or show up at my house unexpected, which sometimes they do. But, the positives of making myself accessible to people have really begun to outweigh the negatives.
Do you get inundated with calls, with contacts? I mean, the famous picture that I think a lot of alderpersons worry about is, can I even go to the grocery store and get a moment's peace? Is that a problem for you?
No, I think I have welcomed that. It's a small town. So before I was an alderperson, I couldn't go to the grocery store and get a moment of peace. So I don't
Your
think
friends
that
are going to bug you about that beer run up in the mountains.
I don't think that this role as alderperson has really changed that. And I already forgot what I was going to say as the second part of the question earlier, but it'll come back to me.
Well, and I guess we were talking earlier, where we jumped from was, has society changed? Has their perspective of what they think government is?
Oh.
Has that changed?
Yes. So the second part of that, I think, is that people think of government as one thing. So federal government, state government, local government is all one government, which we all do work together. But I don't think it's fair to extrapolate people's experiences with their federal legislators as their experiences with their neighbor, AKA me. Mm-hmm. And so I'm looking forward to continuing to work with people to say, I'm not your typical politician. You've known me the whole time I've lived here. We can work together on this, even if you've had experiences that made you feel like you weren't heard. And it's fun for me to get people in the community on board with what we're trying to do as a local government, because we really are all on the same team, not just within the government, but within our whole city. We're all trying to get the government and the city to run in a fabulous way. And that's everybody's end goal.
Yep. So my next question is going to be, is it working? Can you talked about your first experience, the guy that basically emotionally punched you in the nose. But now, fast forward, tell me a story of something more recently where maybe the emotion started out at the same level, but it came together. Is it working now?
That's a really good question. I got to think of a good example of that. I know that I don't let it bother me as much when people are upset, because I don't have time to be bothered with that. I want to get to the meat. I want to get to the issue that's bothering them and make them feel heard. But let me think of a good recent example. Well, we had some really nasty storms in June. We had some really terrible flooding. And as an alderperson, I ran out. We were actually in committee meetings on the night of the storm, and a big tree fell on the building that we were in for our city meetings, which was kind of dramatic. But, the next day I ran out to try to help everybody and see what was going on. And no one seemed upset at my involvement in government or previous government. They were amazed that I was there to help them. Like, as their alderperson and their neighbor, they thought that was really cool that their alderperson was coming out to help. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking forward to continuing to make it where it's not a surprise that when something rough is happening in your community, that your alder people come out to help you, instead of feeling like, your alderperson is in a secret office somewhere, and if you want their attention or their help, you got to go banging down the door.
Right. Well, and if you look at, Gallup Corporation, the polling firm, for decades has asked, what is the public's opinion of government? And what I always find interesting, the takeaway there is Congress is, right down sort of there. The state legislature is kind of right down there. And then about twice that, in terms of the level of approval and trust, the highest is for local government. But I think approachability has to be the reason why, don't you? That people know where to find you. People know they can find you. So that maybe that approachability is the price you pay for trust, possibly?
That could be. I think that is part of the setup of this, or the intention of the setup of this type of government. You can't expect your senators to be able to have the same kind of contact with their constituents as I do with my neighbors. Mm-hmm. I have about 2,200 constituents. It's a lot easier for me to get in touch with them.
Tammy Baldwin has about 5 million.
It's a little bit harder for her to run into them at brunch than it is for me to run into my constituents at brunch. Mm-hmm. And so you do give up some of your privacy and your anonymity, but I think it's totally worth it.
Are you much of a student of history? I mean, do you have a perspective on whether civility is getting better, worse, or it's always been this way?
I think that there's always been incivility, but I think that it is being showcased and spotlighted more than it was in the past.
Okay, we think about it more. Well, I was in preparing for this show, I kind of did a quick search back, and I think we all know, at least in theory, of the McCarthy era, right? When everybody was paranoid about communism, but it was an attorney who was representing the army, and McCarthy had him on the hot seat, and this guy famously was kind of choking back tears at this congressional hearing and basically said, "Sir, have you no decency?" And what's interesting is historians say that was sort of the end of McCarthy, that he just beat up on one too many people, and there was a change, and people said, okay, enough's enough. The other point in history we were talking about before the show started, there was the territorial Wisconsin legislature. 2 legislators got into a fight over the appointment of the Grant County sheriff. I mean, we're not even talking slavery or, civil rights here. We're talking about whose buddy should be the Grant County sheriff. And one guy ended up shooting and killing the other. But what struck me about that is they were friends. They actually roomed together. So it's like, folks, we're losing perspective here. A fair amount of our audience are local elected officials, new council members, people like yourself. What's your advice? What's your peer-to-peer advice? Having come through some of this, what do you think works best? What would you avoid? What would you like to tell them?
Sure. Going back to the, have you no decency and the reset that kind of came after that.
Right. Reset. Good
I think
word.
we need a reset in many levels of government right now. We need to go to a place where asking people to act with civility is not a rare, crazy idea. It's not booed by crowds. I think that the only way we'll get a reset is by individual people saying, okay, I'm going to change my thinking. I'm going to change my approach. I'm going to try to be as open and honest and vulnerable and kind with people, my coworkers and the constituents. Just knowing that I always just keep telling myself we're on the same team. We're on the same team. We have the same end goal. Sometimes it's hard to remind yourself of that when you're in these arguments and discussions.
But at the same time, I think your openness is a huge asset, and you would not advise council members to hide in their bubble, would you?
Definitely not.
Because that would backfire, wouldn't it?
It would backfire, and it's really stressful on you as a local elected official. I can't imagine the amount of stress that politicians feel when they pretend and act as if they know everything. Because there's no way that any of us could know everything. There's no way that I could know everything that I need to know about the parks and the streets and the police and the fire and the financing of the city. There's just too many things to expect anyone to know everything about everything. So you do your research, you learn what you need to learn, and you ask a lot of questions. But it's much easier to be open with people and say, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, how can we find the answers to our problems and come up with good solutions? It's not helpful to hide in your bubble and not talk to anybody and pretend that you don't need help, because that's a tough job and I need help.
And at the end of the day, you're a citizen representative. You are representing your neighbors, people that live around you. So you really can't hide from that.
I wouldn't want to. I feel like I'm an expert of the north side of District 4 because I spend a lot of time there. I work from home. I'm a runner and a bicyclist, so I'm always going up and down my streets. But I am always shocked and amazed by the awesome conversations I have with my constituents when they tell me, well, I was born in this very house 70 years ago, and right across the street was the grocery store, and we used to have this problem with blank, 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 and you know, you can't have the same perspective as everybody in your neighborhood.
Right.
So allowing people to come share their perspectives with you, their concerns and their praises of the city, it's really helpful for me to create a more well-rounded idea.
Great, terrific. Well, and by the way, before we conclude, thank you for your service. One of the challenges in this day and age is getting an adequate number of people to seek local office. And not that I want to complain about you mentioning not being on Earth during the 70s, which were my teen years, but we'll let that one slide. But people of your generation in particular have a lot of other things going on in your life. So, and the fact also a woman, only, 23% of local elected officials in Wisconsin are women. Clearly, we're a little short there. So on all those fronts, thank you.
No problem. I do encourage my friends to get involved in local government. You don't have to be elected. You could volunteer to be on a committee. You can just come to city meetings. But it really helps people in my generation feel involved with politics and making a difference. When you feel disconnected from your state level elected officials or your federal elected officials, or you just want to be more involved, your local government is the place to do that.
Mm-hmm. And just one last real quick question, what occurs to me, particularly in light of there was a shooting out in Washington, you know, just sort of the level of the world today. Do you ever feel fearful in your job?
No, I really don't. We have all sorts of difficult things that we address every day, but I don't think life is too short to live your life in fear. Mm-hmm. And I would rather go out and try to do a good job and represent people and spread joy than spend my time being afraid of what could happen.
Awesome. Awesome. My guest is Heidi Oberstadt. Heidi is a relatively new city council person for Stevens Point, the 4th district of Stevens Point, which is the really cool part of the city.
Thanks,
sure
Jerry.
You'll know it if you go there. But talking about civility, talking about the need for that reset, and perhaps realizing that the reset really starts from right within each one of us, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for being my guest, Heidi. I want to thank once again the Stevens Point Community Television Station, John and the rest of the gang for putting this together. I want to thank Wisconsin Community Media, Gail Sumi at the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, who is always the brains behind the operation. I'm Jerry Deschane. Thank you very much for being here.